There, do you see that wire that's wiggling there? Pat's just in the boot moving the wire we can see, and we know that disappears up above the door, so that should go across into the ceiling. And the way we did that is this panel here isn't actually part of the header lining, that is a separate trim panel, so you can pry that off, just frees up the tacks, and then you can just tack it back down again. And I think it runs up here and then pops out there. So we're going to get labelling and see what we can actually free up. Well, this is an adventure. I've pried off the trim that hides all these raw edges. It's literally just held on with tacks, gently pry it off. And I came above the B pillar and all the tacks in the head lining were missing. So if somebody's been here before, this sort of reinforces the suspicion that the thing that took the car off the road was the wiring. What that allows me to see now is you have the wiring run from the semaphore and the B pillar in here, and it disappears up into the roof, into this part of the car's structure. This is a piece of wood, and the wiring disappears through there. Now, I know this rib runs across all the way to the other side of the car. Now, since we got the car, the trim on this side was always loose and broken. We weren't sure why. I now think it's because somebody was trying to sort out the wiring. So I've spent some time using these. These are the most effective tack removal tools I've come across, even more so than tack removal tools, which tend to jump and then jab through the fabric. And I've took out a whole bunch of tacks. Some of them were much bigger, which were presumably because that's from somebody being in here before. But that allows me to look up underneath the head lining, and I can see this wire here, and I know from having wiggled it, that one runs across the top of the door and disappears down here into the boot. So I found the wiring route. One leg comes down here, and one leg goes off, like the other side, up across this beam into the roof. Now, I'm really hoping I don't have to split any of the seams or similar on the head lining. I don't really want to have to remove the head lining to do this job. I'm hoping I can just tie some string onto the end here and gradually feed it through, because my arms, I can reach across in the roof cavity, so I think I can do it if I'm careful. The only thing I might have to do is take a few more tacks out this side, so I've got some more room in the fabric to get in, but we'll see. I can't record this and show you. It's too awkward, everything's in everything else's way. But I will bring you back when I've done it, or when I've failed. We'll see what happens. There are many jobs on cars that are fun. This is not one of them. I've got my string here for the wiring loom. You can just see it resting against the roof there. Now the gap between this and the roof of the car is quite small, but I can get my arms through. So I've been able to start feeding the wire loose, as you can see, and then I found it was getting stuck somewhere. So I had to cut this bit open a little bit because it was snagging in the middle, and I couldn't tell why. And it's because right where the wiring for the interior light is, it's stapled to the ceiling. So I just need to take that staple out, and then this should pull through no problem. It only seems to be held by this staple in the middle and the routing on the edges above the B pillars. Once you've got that free, it seems to be fairly straightforward to do. So I've managed to do it without removing the head lining, which is great. I could redo the head lining, I have the skill to do it, but I really wanted to avoid it if I could. So I'm going to keep pulling these bits through. I'm going to snip that staple out, and we'll see how we get on. Got the one I knew about out, and then was trying to get the wire loose. It was still stuck, and found another one, and this is on the edge of the plywood plinth that lives up here in the middle for the interior light to screw into. So hopefully pull that one out there, and then this will be free. Fingers crossed. Right, we're getting there. So I've left my bobbins string connected. So that one now follows the route that the old wiring loom did. This one for the interior light is also following the same route. This one I've snipped off. I've just left loads and loads of string so I can get all the way to the back of the car. And now I've come through the roof and I'm just pulling these ones out. So I've got the semaphore connectors there disconnected, working my way along. And these aren't wood, these are actually metal, as I found out when I touched one and realised it was the same temperature as Venus. The thing that makes it a little bit awkward is the headlining. There's no bows in here, no metal bows. These are actually, the fabric's tacked directly to the wooden frame. And because I don't want to redo the headlining, I'm having to work around that. So I'm just unfeeding through here, working my way down, and I know I can do through this panel here that I've loosened, and then I can get into the boot. Once I'm in the boot, I'm free of the interior of the car, and then the only old wiring in here is the very few tails of instrument clusters and stuff down there, which will all be sorted out when the new wiring goes in. There's no need to remove any of that just yet. So yeah, this is a big chunk of the job, and it has been impossible to film, so I am sorry about that. I would have liked to have shown you how it went, so I'm just trying to fill you in as I go so you can see how it routes. I will be making a diagram, so there's a physical wiring diagram rather than just a schematic, because I think that will help other owners in the future that are trying to do this job, so they'll know what to expect, at least on this car. I don't know that every car will be identical, but they'll be at least similar. So yeah, let's crack on, get this next section out and see how far we can go. That was a battle. What we got there? The last one was quite difficult to get to. I think really removing the back seat would be ideal, which I think is these screws up here. I can't see any other obvious fixings for the back seat. But I found that I could just about reach around both sides and feed the wire through this gap here where the strings are coming out. So now I have all the strings labelled, ready for the new wiring loom. So I can just hopefully, carefully pull everything through, and hopefully we don't have a snapped thread when we're trying to do that, because this is a horrible job. Inside the car, where the wiring comes out, you can see we've got the string. I've just trimmed it a little bit short just to keep it out the way. This will mean, hopefully, when I get the new wiring figured out, I can just tie it to the ends in the boot, and then you pull on these ends carefully and it should feed everything through the same route I've just unpicked it. So I now know for definite the wiring runs from this semaphore here up into the ceiling through a brace, a metal brace. It comes back to about here, kicks back for the interior light, which is held on with plywood, and there are a couple of staples holding this section of wiring in place. This then goes back to the brace across the middle, across the roof, to this B-pillar, into this semaphore, through another metal brace up here. It then follows just above the door line, a couple of holes in the braces up here, all the way over the roof, down behind this panel, down the side of the seat, and then disappears through a void into the boot, which is the next section I'm going to do. And the boot section should take me to the rear lights. I know it takes me to the number plate light as well. So I have one trim panel to remove to access that, and one boot hinge as well, and then I can unfeed that section. Right, next section. I've had a drink and a mini rest. I've got to unscrew this panel here and this hinge, all little flathead screws, so that I can get this section of the wiring out. I can feel that something is catching in the middle, so it's probably another hole through the frame that they've threaded it through. Once you've got that section fed through, You can then get in the underboot bit, and you can see that's where things start branching off for the rear lights. When I've got that bit disconnected, I can probably get the bit off the chassis rail, which will be good. This one here, that's for the number plate light, and then this is the main loom which deals with the brake lights and all that sort of business. One thing I wasn't expecting with this is as soon as I undid this panel, it actually came out very easily. There's not really any resistance. So it seems to be it was the tension of this. The screws for the hinge do not want to come undone at all, so I'm kind of glad I don't have to. It's not much fun working in there either. I figured out what was jamming it in addition. I took out the wiring for the boot light, run a string, labelled that up, and that's given me a lot more space for the main loom, so that's what I'm going to pull through now. There we go. Leave that string attached for now. That's another big section out. Here in the underboot section, there's quite a bit going on. A lot of bullet connectors here, so I'm going to disconnect what I can. I think it's going to make it easier to do the next section, because I think this piece I've just pulled through is a separate loom in its own right. It's a bit of a scorcher today, slowing me down a bit. So to remove this, there's just this little bolt, except it's not a bolt, it's a nut with a threaded shank on it. Lift off the chrome bit, lift off the glass bit, get that clean. So there should be like a bullet slide connector thing there, which you can see here, and then you've got your other connector there. Once those are disconnected, you go inside here and remove that, and then that goes all the way to the back. I did start taking out some of the screws because I intended to take out all of this trim here, and some of the screw heads have been a bit stubborn, so I'm going to leave them. Clearly somebody has already had a go at this, so I'm just going to pull the wiring through, and then I can remove all of this later when it's not so hot and do it properly. But it won't matter for what we're doing here. Last bit of wiring at the back is the brake lights. These are quite interesting in their own way. First thing to do is take out the two screws. There we go. Do hold on to the glass when you do it, because they are literally glass, and I gather they're a little bit tricky and expensive to replace. So take that off the rubber. There we go, it's hiding. It's funny that that's not on the other side. There we go. That's a lot of aluminium corrosion. There's no protection behind these either, so everything that gets thrown up back here, it gets past the mudguards, just goes straight on these connections. Gently prise off the rubber boot, you can see you've got a bullet connector here. Well, you can almost see it, apart from the dirt. There we go. I wouldn't normally suggest to use pliers like that, but we are replacing all the wiring, so it doesn't really matter in this occasion. And then for these are what I found quite interesting, because I've not come across these before. You push down, I'll use the screwdriver, it's easier to see. Push down on the tangs there, and it releases the wire. It's a bit like a hi-fi speaker connector thing. You can just pull out like that. And that's one unit out. They are slightly different, these two. The other one, there was no screw in there to remove it, it was just friction fit. And this one's painted red on the inside, which doesn't seem to be an effective decision for light output, so we'll probably change that so it looks like that one. They have different lenses as well. I do prefer this one, but we have got a spare one of these, so we'll probably switch over to this type when we put everything back together. Once you've got all that disconnected, you can reach the wire there and just pull it straight back into the car. So with that disconnected from there, the wiring for the brake lights actually runs across this strengthening bar here. This basically supports the upper deck of the boot lid, the upper deck of the boot floor even. And there's a series of flathead screws which hold clips that hold the wire in. They seem just a little bit too tight for me to pull the wire through. So I've got those soaking in some penetrating fluid for now, and when that's been soaking a while I'll have another go at them and remove that. So the only wiring left to go now is that section. The clump here that you can see, you've got on the left the brake light circuit, and on the right that's what disappears down into the chassis for the main chassis run. And that means that the wiring runs from here to the front of the chassis rather than branching up into the B-pillar like we originally thought. It is slightly easier to unpick it this way, just a bit more confusing when you've not got a physical diagram for the car, which we didn't have. But now we know how it goes, it'll be a lot easier in the future, and we can share that with other owners of these cars should they need to tackle any of this sort of work. That sounds like a good idea to me. Here we are in the boot. This is the middle shelf. So on these cars the boot has a shelf part way across, and underneath here is where your spare wheel lives and any of your tools that you might need. Just means then that any luggage you're carrying is kept separate from all your grubby stuff. The wiring loom that does the rear brakes runs across behind this support bar here, held in with these, which are little flat-headed screws that have a nut on the back. The nut is close enough to a 10mm equivalent that's what I'm using, and the screw heads are quite soft, so I am having to be quite careful. A bit of trial and error, and I found if you use the crescent end of your spanner and just work the nut on the back, it very quickly frees off, and then you can unscrew from the front. And there we go. This also means I can reuse all the old P-clips, so they'll all be shaped properly. And you can see just what sort of state this is in. And, very definitely needs replacing. On the Lanchester, the lights go in these aluminium cast housings, and what's supposed to happen is this little screw hole here, there's another one down here, has a steel screw with predictable results that holds the back piece, this section, against the light unit. So when you take out the larger chrome screws, it just takes off the lens and the bezel and gives you access to the bulb without having to take the whole unit out. I'm in a making sure I don't lose bits mode at the moment, so I'm just screwing these back on before I run the wiring. And one thing to be aware of is when you're going into an aluminium housing, you need to be careful you don't cross thread. So when you push the screw in, unscrew it, and you'll hear a clonk as it actually aligns with the thread. Like that. Then you know the thread's seated, then very carefully and slowly screw it in until you feel it just engaging with the thread. That way you shouldn't ever cross thread an aluminium thread, which is just a nightmare when it happens. Also, these have a little sort of round end on them just to help you locate them in the hole. Since these lenses are glass, they can be a little bit fragile, so don't tighten all the way on one side. Go until it feels snug, like that is, and then switch to your other one. And that should apply nice even pressure to prevent the glass from chipping on the edges or worse. There you go.